The dusty streets of Tucson Territory blazed under the merciless Arizona sun as Ayanna stood frozen in the doorway of the saloon, her dark eyes fixed on the scene unfolding before her. Her brother Nalnish sat hunched over a poker table, his weathered hands trembling as he pushed forward the last of their family's silver. Jewelried their grandmother's sacred necklace that had been passed down through 5 generations of Apache women. "I ain't got nothing else," Nalnish muttered, sweat beading on his forehead despite the shade of the saloon's interior. Across from him sat 3 white men, their eyes cold and calculating. The largest among them, a bearded man with cruel eyes, leaned back in his chair and smiled. "Well now, that ain't entirely true, is it?" The man's gaze shifted deliberately toward Ayanna, who felt her blood turn to ice. "That pretty little sister of yours might be worth something to the right buyer." Ayanna's heart hammered against her ribs as she watched her brother's face crumble with shame and desperation. The saloon fell silent, except for the tick of the old clock on the wall and the distant sound of horses outside. She had followed Nalnish here, hoping to convince him to return home, to stop throwing away what little they had left after their parents' death. Instead, she was witnessing the moment her own brother would trade her freedom for his gambling debts. She's Apache," Nalnish whispered, as if that might somehow make the offer less appealing. The bearded man chuckled darkly. "Even better. Apache women know how to work, know how to survive. It's worth plenty to a rancher who needs reliable help." He gestured toward a tall, silent figure standing near the burra man Ayanna hadn't noticed before. "Mr. Kane here has been looking for someone to help manage his spread. Cooking, cleaning, tending animals. Your sister would do just fine." Thomas Kane stepped forward from the shadows, and Ayanna found herself looking into the most unusual eyes she had ever seen, pale blue like winter sky, but not cruel like the others. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that needed cutting and hands that bore the calluses of honest work. When he looked at her, she saw something unexpected: reluctance. "This ain't right," Kane said quietly, his voice carrying a slight drawl that suggested he hailed from somewhere farther south. "A man shouldn't be wagering his kin." "Debt's a debt," the bearded man snapped. "You want help on your ranch or not? This girl's young, strong, and she'll work for room and board. Won't find a better deal anywhere else." Ayanna watched her brother's internal struggle play out across his face. She knew he loved her, had always protected her since their parents died in a cavalry raid 3 years ago. But the gambling had consumed him, became an illness that ate away at his judgment and his honor. The debts had been mounting for months. And now the white creditors were demanding payment with interest that would have taken them years to earn. "Nalnish," she whispered, the word barely audible. It was the first time she had spoken since entering the saloon, and her voice cracked with betrayal and disbelief. Her brother couldn't meet her eyes. "It's just for a year," he said desperately, though they all knew it was a lie. "Just until I can win back enough to buy you free. You'll see, Ayanna. I'll make this right." Kane stepped closer to the table, his expression troubled. "What's your name, miss?" he asked gently. "Ayanna," she replied, her voice stronger now, though her hands shook at her sides. "It means eternal blossom," Nalnish said suddenly, looking up at Kane with pleading eyes. "She's all the family I got left. You'll treat her decent?" Kane studied Ayanna's face for a long moment, and she felt as though he was seeing past her fear to something deeper. "I give you my word," he said finally. "She'll be treated with respect on my land." The transaction was completed with brutal efficiency. Ayanna's few possessions were gathered: a worn leather bag containing her mother's sewing kit, a faded photograph of her parents, and the clothes on her back. Everything else, her home, her life, her freedom, was forfeit. As they prepared to leave, Nalnish finally approached her. Tears streamed down his weathered cheeks as he reached for her hand. "Ayanna, please. I never meant for." She pulled her hand away, her dark eyes blazing with hurt and anger. "You are dead to me," she said in Apache, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. "You are no longer my brother." In their culture, such a declaration was devastating, severing of family bonds that went deeper than mere anger. Kane watched this exchange with obvious discomfort, though he couldn't understand the Apache words. When Ayanna walked past her brother without another glance and headed for the saloon's entrance, Kane followed, leaving Nolnish alone with his money and his shame. Outside, the late afternoon sun painted the desert landscape in shades of gold and crimson. Kane's horse stood waiting, a sturdy bay mare that nickered softly as they approached. He had also brought a smaller horse, a gentle-looking paint mare, that he gestured toward. "Can you ride?" he asked. Ayanna nodded, not trusting her voice. She had been riding since childhood. All Apache children learned early. "It's about a 3-hour ride to my place," Kane said, checking the cinch on her saddle. "You can stop if you need to rest." She said nothing, simply mounted the paint mare with practiced ease. Kane climbed onto his own horse, and they rode out of Tucson as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. Behind them, the town grew smaller until it was just a smudge on the horizon, taking with it everything Ayanna had ever known. The silence between them stretched like the vast desert around them, broken only by the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats and the whisper of wind through the sagebrush. Mile after mile passed beneath their horses' hooves as they traveled northwest. Through the Arizona Territory, the landscape gradually changed from desert scrub to rolling hills dotted with juniper and pinyon pine. Ayanna rode with her back straight and her face set like stone, her dark hair streaming behind her in the warm wind. She had braided eagle feathers into it that morning, a symbol of strength and freedom that now felt like mockery. Thomas Kane glanced at her frequently, noting the proud way she carried herself, despite her circumstances. He had expected tears, pleading, perhaps attempts to escape. Instead, she rode as if she were a warrior going into battle, silent and dignified. It made what he had done feel even worse. The truth was, Kane hadn't come to Tucson looking to buy a person. He had gone to town for supplies and to hire a hand for the ranch his previous worker had moved on to California, chasing gold rumors. When he overheard the poker game conversation, something in the girl's eyes had compelled him to intervene. Not that she would see it as intervention. To her, he was just another white man who had purchased her like livestock as the sun reached its zenith. Kane guided them toward a small creek that wound through a grove of cottonwoods. The horses needed water, and he thought perhaps Ayanna might appreciate a chance to rest, though she had shown no signs of fatigue. "We'll stop here for a bit," he said, dismounting near the creek bank. Ayanna slid down from her horse without acknowledging his words. She led the paint mare to the water and stood watching as the animal drank. Kane noticed how she spoke softly to the horse in Apache. Hardtack from his saddlebags, along with a canteen of water. "You should eat something," he said, holding out the food. She looked at the offering for a long moment, her pride warring with practical need, but she moved away to eat alone beneath one of the cottonwoods. Kane settled against a boulder and watched her covertly. Even in her simple cotton dress, probably the finest thing she owned, she moved with natural grace. Her features were delicate but strong, with high cheekbones and full lips that were pressed into a hard line. She was perhaps 19 or 20, young but with eyes that had seen too much hardship. "I know you probably think I'm just another white man looking to take advantage," Kane said quietly, breaking the silence that had stretched between them for hours. "But that ain't what this is about." Ayanna's dark eyes flicked to his face, but she said nothing. "I got a small spread about 10 miles from here. Nothing fancy. Just cattle, some horses, chickens. The work is hard, but honest. Not some shed or barn, not some shed or barn." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I ain't looking for anything beyond household help and maybe assistance with the animals. You got my word on that." Still silence. But Kane thought he detected a slight relaxation in her shoulders. "My wife died 2 years back," he continued, not sure why he was sharing this with a stranger who wouldn't respond. "Fever took her. The house needs tending, and I got more cattle than I can handle by myself." At the mention of his wife, Ayanna's expression shifted slightly. Kane caught the change and realized she was not as indifferent to his words as she pretended. She would have hated what happened back there in town. Would have given me hell for not finding another way. He stood and brushed dust from his pants. "Reckon we should keep moving. Still got a ways to go before dark." They remounted and continued their journey through the afternoon heat. The terrain grew more rugged as they climbed into foothills covered with oak and manzanita. Kane pointed out landmarks as they rode a distinctive rock formation shaped like a sleeping giant, a valley where wildflowers bloomed in spring, the distant peaks of the Santa Catalina Mountains. Ayana listened, but offered no responses. As evening approached, they crested a ridge and Cain reined in his horse. "There," he said, pointing toward a valley below. "That's home." Ayana followed his gesture and saw a modest ranch spread across the valley floor. Simple wooden house with a covered porch sat among a cluster of outbuildings, a barn, chicken coop, and what looked like a bunkhouse. Cattle grazed in fenced pastures, and she could see horses in a corral near the barn. Was humble, but well maintained, with evidence of care in every detail. "It ain't much," Cain said, misinterpreting her silence for disappointment. "But it's honest work and honest living." As they descended toward the ranch, Ayana found herself studying the man who had bought her. His clothes were clean but worn, patched in places but with care. His horse was well fed and well trained, responding to subtle pressure from his knees. The ranch buildings, even from a distance, showed signs of regular maintenance. Whatever else Thomas Cain might be, he was not lazy or careless. They rode into the yard as the sun touched the western peaks, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Chickens scattered as they approached, and a large yellow dog emerged from the porch to greet them with enthusiastic barking. "Easy, Rex," Cain said, dismounting. "We got company." The dog approached Ayana's horse cautiously, tail wagging. To Cain's surprise, she reached down and let the animal sniff her hand before stroking his head. Rex immediately fell in love, pressing against her leg as she dismounted. "He's got good taste," Cain observed. "Usually takes him longer to warm up to strangers." For just a moment, Ayana's lips almost curved into what might have been a smile. But the expression vanished quickly, replaced by her mask of stoic silence. Cain led the horses toward the barn while Ayana stood in the yard. Taking in her new surroundings. The house was larger than it had appeared from the ridged 2 stories, with windows that reflected the dying light. A vegetable garden stretched along one side, neat rows of corn, beans, and squash growing in the rich soil. Everything spoke of a man who took pride in his work and his home. "Come on," Cain said, returning from the barn. "I'll show you around before it gets full dark." The interior of Cain's house surprised Ayana with its warmth and cleanliness. Unlike the rough bachelor quarters she had expected, the front room was furnished with care handmade wooden furniture polished to a warm glow, braided rugs covering the plank floors, and curtains at the windows that spoke of a woman's touch. Oil lamps cast a golden light that made everything feel welcoming, despite the circumstances of her arrival. "Margaret made most of the soft furnishings," Cain said quietly, noticing her gaze lingering on the curtains. "Always said a house wasn't a home without proper curtains and rugs." He led her through the main floor, showing her the kitchen with its large cast-iron stove and well-stocked pantry, the dining room with its sturdy oak table, and a small parlor lined with bookshelves. Everything was immaculately maintained, but Ayana could sense the loneliness that permeated the space, the careful way Cain avoided touching certain objects. The dust covers on some of the furniture, the silence that felt too heavy for one person. "Your room is upstairs," he said, lighting a lamp to guide them up the wooden staircase. Margaret always hoped we'd have children. She fixed up this room special. The room he showed her was small, but comfortable, with a single bed covered in a colorful quilt, a washstand with a china pitcher and basin, and a window that looked out over the valley. Wildflowers in a small vase sat on the windowsill, fresh, as if someone had just placed them there. "I put those there this morning," Cain admitted, following her gaze. "Thought it might make the room feel more welcoming." It was such an unexpectedly thoughtful gesture that Ayana felt her carefully constructed wall of indifference crack slightly. She touched one of the flower petals gently, remembering how her mother used to gather wildflowers for their wickiup. "Each spring, the wash basin there has fresh water," Cain continued. "There's soap and towels in the stand. If you need anything else, just ... "Well, I suppose you're not talking to me, are you?" He managed a rueful smile. "My room's just down the hall if you need anything urgent. Otherwise, I'll be up before dawn to tend the animals." He hesitated at the doorway, clearly wanting to say more, but unsure how to bridge the chasm between them. "Ayana," he said finally, and something in the way he spoke her name made her look directly at him for the first time since leaving Tucson. "I know this ain't the life you chose, but I hope we can find a way to make it bearable for both of us." After he left, Ayanna sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself to truly absorb her situation. She was alone, far from everything familiar, in the house of a stranger who owned her as surely as he owned his cattle and horses. Yet the room around her spoke of kindness, the fresh flowers, the carefully mended quilt, the way Cain had called her by name instead of just girl or Apache. She unpacked her meager belongings, placing her mother's sewing kit on the small table beside the window and her parents' photograph on the windowsill next to the flowers. The familiar objects looked strange in the foreign surroundings, but they gave her a small anchor of comfort. Sleep eluded her for hours. She lay listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch cattle lowing in the distance, the night wind through the eaves, the settling of the old wooden house. Somewhere down the hall she could hear Cain moving about his room, and later the faint sound of what might have been crying. It shocked her to realize that her captor might be suffering too. Dawn came with the crow of roosters and the sound of Cain's boots on the stairs. Ayanna dressed quickly and made her way to the kitchen, where she found him building up the fire in the stove. "Morning," he said, without turning around. "Hope you slept some." She hadn't, but she didn't reply. Instead, she watched as he set coffee to brewing and began pulling ingredients from the pantry: flour, eggs, bacon. His movements were practiced but inefficient, and she could see he was accustomed to cooking for himself in the simplest possible way. Without speaking, Ayanna moved to the stove and gently displaced him. She had been cooking for herself in Nalnish since she was 12, and the familiar motions of preparing a meal calmed her nerves. Cain stepped back, surprised but not objecting, and watched as she expertly prepared biscuits and fried bacon with eggs. "You don't have to," he began, but something in her expression stopped him. When breakfast was ready, they sat at opposite ends of the long dining table and ate in silence. Cain seemed to want to speak several times, opening his mouth and then closing it again. Finally, he pushed back from the table and stood. "I'll be working the south pasture today," he said, "checking fence lines. You're welcome to come along if you want. Or you can explore the house and grounds. Just ... don't try to run. There's nowhere to go for miles, and the desert ain't forgiving to someone on foot." After he left, Ayanna spent the morning exploring her new prison. She examined every room, learning the layout and routine of the house. In Cain's bedroom, she found evidence of his deceased wife everywhere: brushes still arranged on the dressing table, clothes hanging in the wardrobe, a wedding photograph on the nightstand showing a younger Cain with a pretty blonde woman who smiled radiantly at the camera. The kitchen became her domain as she prepared lunch, instinctively cooking for two despite her anger. When Cain returned, at midday, dusty and tired, he found a full meal waiting and fresh coffee brewing. His surprise and gratitude were evident, though he tried to hide both. This is wonderful," he said, after tasting the stew she had prepared from vegetables in the garden and meat from the pantry. "Margaret used to say food tastes better when it's made with care." That evening, as they sat on the front porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold, Cain tried again to reach her. "I know you got no reason to trust me," he said quietly, "but I want you to know that what your brother did, it ain't right. No person should be traded like property." He paused, staring out at the darkening landscape. "I lost my wife, and I know what it feels like to have your whole world torn away. Can't undo what happened to you, but I can promise you'll be safe here." Ayanna felt something shift inside her chest. It's not forgiveness, but perhaps the first tiny crack in her wall of anger. She still said nothing, but when Cain whistled softly to Rex and the dog came bounding over, she didn't move away when the animal settled between them on the porch steps. As the stars emerged in the vast Arizona sky, she found herself thinking, not of escape or revenge, but of the unexpected gentleness in Thomas Cain's pale blue eyes and the way he had placed fresh flowers in her room. 3 weeks passed in a careful dance of silence and growing understanding. Ayanna had settled into the rhythm of ranch life, rising before dawn to prepare breakfast, tending the vegetable garden, caring for the chickens, and maintaining the house with an efficiency that both impressed and worried Cain. She worked as if trying to exhaust herself, as if constant motion could keep the pain and anger at bay. Cain, for his part, had grown accustomed to her wordless presence. She anticipated his needs with uncanny accuracy, hot coffee ready when he came in from the morning chores, his shirts mended before he realized they were torn, meals that reminded him of the care his wife used to show. Yet the silence between them remained complete, a wall she refused to let him breach, no matter how gently he tried. On this particular evening, a late summer storm was building over the mountains, sending cool winds across the valley and promising the first real rain in weeks. Cain had spent the day moving cattle to higher ground, and he returned to the house as the first drops began to fall. His clothes dusty and his hands scraped from wrestling with stubborn fence wire, Ayanna looked up from where she was kneading bread dough at the kitchen table, and for a moment concern flickered across her features. Cain's shirt was torn at the shoulder, and blood seeped through the fabric where barbed wire had caught him. "It's nothing," he said, noticing her gaze. "Just a scratch." But as he moved toward the stairs, intending to clean up before dinner, his boot caught on a loose floorboard and he stumbled, catching himself against the doorframe with a sharp intake of breath. The injury was clearly more than he had admitted. Without thinking, Ayanna abandoned her bread dough and moved to his side, her hands hovering near his wounded shoulder. For the first time in 3 weeks, she looked directly into his eyes, and he saw genuine worry there. "I'm all right," he said softly. But he made no move to pull away from her nearness. Ayanna stepped back and gestured toward a kitchen chair, her meaning clear. When he hesitated, she gave him a look that brooked no argument in expression, so reminiscent of his late wife's stubborn concern that Cain found himself obeying despite himself. She fetched clean water and cloth from the washstand, along with a bottle of whiskey from the cupboard. Her touch was gentle but sure as she carefully cut away the torn fabric of his shirt, revealing a jagged gash that would need cleaning and bandaging. "You don't have to," Cain began, but stopped when she fixed him with another stern look. As she worked, cleaning the wound with practiced efficiency, Cain found himself studying her face in the lamplight. Her brow was furrowed with concentration, her full lips pressed together as she focused on her task. There was something almost sacred about the moment, the first time she had willingly touched him, the care she was taking despite everything that lay between them. "My grandmother taught me," Ayanna said suddenly, her voice rusty from disuse, "how to tend wounds." Cain went very still, afraid that any movement might break the spell and send her back into silence. "She sounds like a wise woman," he said carefully. Was Ayanna's hands continued their gentle work, wrapping clean cloth around his shoulder? She said the spirits put healing in a woman's hands, but only if her heart is in the right place. "And is it?" Cain asked quietly. "Your heart, I mean? Is it in the right place?" Ayanna paused, her dark eyes meeting his. For a long moment, the only sounds were the drumming of rain on the roof and the distant rumble of thunder. "I don't know," she admitted finally. "I thought it was broken, thought it was full of nothing but hate." Outside, the storm intensified, and lightning illuminated the kitchen windows. In the flickering light, Cain could see tears gathering in Ayanna's eyes. "You saved me today," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "When that rattlesnake came into the garden this morning, you didn't have to. I'm just property to you." Cain reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently touched her face. "No," he said firmly, "you're not property. You never were. What happened in that saloon was wrong, and I should have found another way to help you, but I'm not sorry it brought you here because... double quotes, he struggled for words, because this house has been dead since Margaret passed. You brought it back to life." A sob escaped Ayanna's lips, and suddenly the dam burst. All the pain and anger and loneliness of the past weeks poured out of her as she wept for her parents, for her brother's betrayal, for the life she had lost. Cain gathered her into his uninjured arm, holding her as she cried, murmuring soft words of comfort. "I missed my name," she whispered through her tears. "For 3 weeks no one has said my name. In my tribe, when someone stops saying your name, it means you're forgotten. It means you're already dead. Kane's heart clenched at the pain in her voice. Ayana, he said clearly, putting all the warmth and respect he could muster into the word. Ayana, eternal blossom. You're very much alive, and you haven't been forgotten. Not by me. She looked up at him through her tears, seeing something in his eyes that transformed her understanding of everything that had passed between them. Thomas, she said, speaking his name for the first time. Tom, he corrected gently. My friends call me Tom. Tom, she repeated, and the name felt right on her lips. The storm raged outside, but inside the kitchen, something had shifted irrevocably. They talked through the night truly talked, for the first time. Ayana told him about her childhood, about learning to weave and cook and ride from her mother, about the stories her grandmother used to tell about the old days when the Apache roamed free. Tom shared memories of Margaret, of the dreams they had shared for their ranch, of the loneliness that had consumed him after her death. As dawn broke clear and bright after the storm, they sat at the kitchen table sharing coffee and the bread. Ayana had finished after tending Tom's wound. The awkwardness and anger that had defined their relationship was gone, placed by something tentative but real, the beginning of friendship and perhaps something more. What happens now? Ayana asked, cradling her coffee cup in both hands. Tom was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the rain-washed landscape. I've been thinking about that, he said finally. There's a lawyer in Phoenix, a good man who doesn't much care for the way things are done around here. I could ride there, see about getting papers drawn up, make this arrangement legal and proper, with wages and terms. And if I wanted to leave? She asked, though there was no urgency in the question. Then you'd leave, Tom said simply. Though, I hope... I hope you might consider staying, not as property, but as a partner. This ranch needs both of us to thrive. Ayana looked around the kitchen that had become her domain, thought of the garden where she had planted new vegetables alongside Margaret's flowers. Remembered the way Tom had said her name in the lamplight. I think she said slowly, I might. I'd like to see what we could build together. Outside, the sun climbed higher into a sky washed clean by the storm, and in the distance, cattle moved across pastures green with new grass. It was a new beginning, built not on ownership or debt, but on mutual respect and the fragile hope that two wounded souls might heal each other. As Tom reached across the table to touch her hand, Ayana realized that her name Eternal Blossom had never been more appropriate.
Right.
Like the desert flowers that bloomed after rain, she was discovering that even in the harshest circumstances, beauty and new life could emerge.